the Bitcoin network. Again, it's never happened. A lot of people have tried. In fact, there's tons of people every day that would love to try to do something to hurt Bitcoin. But compromising the blockchain would not only be very costly, it would just be unprofitable. So the amount of computing power that you'd have to put towards compromising the network would be far more expensive than just mining the blocks and getting the Bitcoin reward. So you're incentivized, not only would it be very hard and almost just logistically, I don't want to say it's impossible because nothing's impossible, but not only would it be a huge logistical undertaking, it would be very unprofitable to do so. And so it's not just the energy consumption. When you first think about proof of work and finding out how to have that proof to show that your block is valid, it is the logistics, it's the manpower, it's the technical expertise. As a company that is mining Bitcoin, it is literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours of thought and prep and effort, as well as massive physical infrastructure that goes into the proof of work. So it's not just as simple as I could just expend more energy than them. There's a ton of stuff that goes into proof of work. And so this cartoon, I kind of like it. Basically, just read through it real quick. It's that if everybody's working on block 91 in the network, and one miner wants to go back and change block 74, he would have to make changes and redo all the blocks between 74 and 90, as well as change the block 91. So that's 18 blocks worth of computing power. And the kicker is he would have to do all of that before the people at block 91 solve for that block. So if you can imagine, it's just the higher or the more stacked up the blockchain is, the more difficult it would be for someone to go back in and compromise historical way to visualize it. And so that's basically in a nutshell. And for me, like, I've spent my whole career kind of at this intersection between energy and value and monetizing energy. And so like I had to understand this part of it before I really got Bitcoin, because people were coming to us and saying, you can take energy, whether that's stranded energy like natural gas that didn't have a sales market that was being flared, or whether it's grid energy that's being wasted, and you can otherwise monetize that energy into a much higher value. And for somebody that spent a career kind of, duking it out to make 10-cent margin on natural gas. So for example, nat gas trades at like $4 today. So, if you could find 10 extra cents somewhere in that value chain, that was a huge deal. You could make people millions of dollars for just that little bit of value. And so we built a whole business around this. And when I found out that you could sell natural gas and effectively equate it to $35 per MCF, which is roughly where it's at today, I think it may be a little lower, around $30 per MCF. It was like a earth-shattering, like I couldn't sleep for 2 or 3 days type of moment, because I just thought this just can't be real. This has to be something that's fake, or my entire career and everything I've worked on doing is going to change. And so I had to dig into this and understand why it was expending the energy for me to really get excited or get on board with actually pursuing or going down the path of doing things in the Bitcoin space. And so that's why I started with proof of work and trying to just tell you about the basics of the network. It's kind of the secret sauce, and it's what makes it be able to be decentralized. And so kind of moving on, Bitcoin's energy usage is also something that it's often attacked for, right? And so hopefully you can understand it is because the energy usage is what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. It's why we can have this trustless system. It's the proof of work. It's how we can prove that these transactions are real. And so you see all these people attacking Bitcoin, saying it's going to boil the oceans and that it's accelerating climate change and all these things. And I actually think Bitcoin's energy use is a good thing. And again, this has taken me some time to wrap my head around, but it's the first time in really human history that we have a large scale use of energy that is effectively agnostic to location. So Bitcoin, when you mine it, it is a very small broadband in terms of what it takes to send the signal to the network. So you can use a cell phone modem, you can use a satellite modem, and you can effectively put the Bitcoin mining anywhere. And so again, when you first hear this, you're like, okay, that's fine. You can stick a mine wherever, back behind whatever it is, and plug it in. But when you think about it, and you think about energy, like I have my whole career, all of energy is effectively this game between getting supply to demand. So this microphone is plugged in here. It runs through a cord that's plugged into the wall. You can trace this with a physical object. You can trace this all the way back to a literal source of energy. There is probably a natural gas well or a coal power plant or a windmill or solar panel somewhere in the earth that is far away from here, probably relatively far away, that you have to physically trace that energy to get it to this microphone or to this computer. And so this idea of being able to take large scale demand for energy and move it anywhere to where there's supply is, again, there's just never been anything like that. And not only is it a large scale demand for energy, it is also today, currently at the Bitcoin price and the hash price for the network, it is the highest value use case for energy. So like I mentioned, the natural gas, what I talked about with natural gas, like even retail power is probably at my house, it's around 9 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Right now, mining Bitcoin, depending on how powerful your ASIC computer is, you can get potentially in excess of 30 to 40 cents for that energy. So it is, not only can you move it anywhere, it's the highest value use case. And so then you look at all the applications for this technology and you start to extrapolate it. There's just so many things it can do. So for in our industry, you have what we call flared gas or wasted natural gas. So if you drill an oil well, there is natural gas that's a byproduct of that well. And a lot of times, if there's just not an access to a pipeline, like you can drive a truck and pick up oil, but you have to pipe natural gas. So if it's in a remote area, they just burn the gas off and flare it. And so this is, number one, is wasteful. Number two, methane escapes from the flare, which is a very high CO2 gas. And it's worse than CO2. It's a very high greenhouse gas. And so we can go directly to those wells that are flaring. We can capture that natural gas, convert it to electricity with a generator on site, and power a mobile data center that can then power this network that people are using as this new monetary network to trade value around the world. And so that's one use case that is not only has a great like ESG and environmental angle, but it's also just really cool, right? You can go and capture something that would otherwise be wasted. And there's lots of examples of this. For example, hydro-powered energy, renewables. I mean, the thing about renewables is that they don't work when you need them. They work when they work, right? So when the sun's shining or when the water's flowing or when the wind is blowing. And so there's lots of times when the power, the energy that renewables are creating doesn't match up to when we need to use it, right? The demand ebbs and flows. And so you can put Bitcoin and use it as almost like a digital battery or a virtual power plant where you can locate it at these sites. And so, for example, like Texas, where you've got this grid that during certain times, like if the wind stops blowing because it's really hot, they, getting forced to have brownouts and even blackouts. And so if you could have a large scale source of demand like Bitcoin mining that could underpin additional base load. So you could say we could build a new power plant or we could build 3 new power plants. And when we don't need them, we'll be mining Bitcoin, which, by the way, converts this to a much higher value that you can store forever, has no shelf life. You can send it through space and time at the speed of light anywhere in the world and transfer that value to somebody else. There's just so many things you can do with it that you couldn't do with traditional energy. And then, by the way, whenever we need that energy, you can power the miners down and push it back to the grid. And now you've created effectively a battery or a virtual power plant. And so I could go on and on about the energy and how it's going to change things, but it's really just probably the most disruptive thing. And I've been in the industry for 11 years, so it's certainly the most disruptive thing I've ever seen, and something that I think has a lot of ways that can create a lot of good. One more example I'll use before I move on is, how much time do I have? I've got till the end of the hour. Okay, so one other example I'll use is like, you've got a lot of energy poverty in the world, right? So if you're in the Congo or somewhere in Africa, you may have a lot of natural resources. You might have oil and gas, you may have hydro, you may have access to energy. The problem is you don't have the infrastructure from a transmission standpoint to go underpin that hydro dam, because now you've got to lay transmission lines through the mountains or through the jungles to get it to all the different villages. And so if you had the ability to go to each locale or geographic area, build out a power source, and then when you can't probably use all that power source, but you can use it to mine Bitcoin, harness that value, and then what's ever left over, you can put it into the community. And if you need to turn the mining off to power more stuff in the community, you can. But it effectively acts as like an anchor tenant to support energy projects in different parts of the world where there may be energy poverty. So it sounds kind of crazy that could be something that could help energy poverty around the world, but it's already happening today. We're hearing about it in certain third world countries where people are going out at a small scale and taking energy sources and mining Bitcoin and using that as a source of revenue to help them from an economic standpoint, but then also used to power their villages and their communities. And so again, just this idea that you can bring this really high value of energy and move it mobily around the world is it's just a thing it could change a lot of things. And so back to the total energy usage, you hear these headlines, Bitcoin uses all this energy. Like currently today, the network uses about 0.1% of the entire world's energy. So it's very small. And even if Bitcoin keeps growing at the rate that it's growing at, which it's growing at about 2 times the speed that the internet grew at from a disruption standpoint, it's pretty shocking. But even if it does, I mean, the most that we see in projections that it'll get to is still 0.1%. So this is a rounding error. in the world's energy usage. It is using a lot of energy, but so does a lot of other things, right? Like clothes dryers use far more energy than the Bitcoin network. Consumer electronics use far more energy than the Bitcoin network. Hot tubs use more energy than the Bitcoin network. So the next time you read something that Bitcoin's accelerating climate change or is destroying the planet, this is just what we call FUD. It's a good headline that people like to click on it. But if you really look at it, the energy usage is not only the secret sauce and what makes this possible, it's actually a good thing for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier and what it can do in the energy markets. So talking more about the FUD, because this is what everybody likes to talk about. So you hear it all the time, like Bitcoin's the next tulip bubble. That's one that you see pop up probably every 6 months in an article. Why don't they, or the government's going to ban it. That's another one. So I'll talk on that one. I think Bitcoin as a money, and we're going to go in the next slide, we'll talk about what money is, but the government, what you're going to see is that number one, the government's going to tax it. They already are taxing it. You'll see governments like China that want to move to ban it and that have said that it is banned. And I think they'll probably put some regulatory framework around it. Maybe they will outright ban it forever, but people will ask me about that. Look, China's banning it. What's stopping the US from banning it? And my first response is usually, well, that's bullish, right? Because if the governments are banning it, that means it's working. It's like doing what it's supposed to do, which is creating a new form of money, which they don't like because they want to control the money system. But the other thing is that governments are going to embrace it. So look at what Texas is doing. Governor Abbott keeps coming out and talking about it. They know that they're a big energy state. They've embraced it. They want to be the Bitcoin mining capital. I think Oklahoma needs to step up. We're working on that. Senator Ted Cruz and some of the other Texas speaking out about it. Senator Loomis in Wyoming has come out in support of it. So I think in the world where you see places with freedom, with pro-business, with places that want to facilitate trade, I think they will embrace this technology. And then you look at a country like El Salvador, which has recently made Bitcoin legal tender in the country, and they've mandated that everybody have to take it and use it for transactions. And so, people say the government's going to ban it. Well, this year, a government made it their currency. And so that's the trend that we're seeing. And we're going to see some governments that won't like it, and we're going to see others that will embrace it. And I think that's true with a lot of technology. The other one is like, why don't they just create another Bitcoin? You've got Ethereum, you've got Dogecoin, you've got whatever other meme coin that they decide to make. And a couple of things. It's like, look, I could go create another Wikipedia. I could copy Wikipedia's source code and I could go and post it. And I could pump a bunch of marketing dollars into it, right? And say, hey, everybody use my Wikipedia. Like, no one's going to use my Wikipedia. Like, it's just, there's a thing called a network effect, which people in here probably understand. But it gets back to the energy usage. Like, the Bitcoin network is so robust and it's growing at such a rapid speed. Like, right now where the Bitcoin network is at, it's about where the internet was in 1997. And this is a stat that people throw around. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but it's growing at 2 times the speed of the internet. So where it's at today is very, very early on, and that network effect is continuing to grow. And so, the other thing about it is that, like, these other altcoins, they're trying to do something that Bitcoin's not. I would almost like equate them more to like a company or like equities. You got like Ethereum 1.0, 2.0. They got a new team of developers like Solana and all these other coins, and it's changing all the time. They're upgrading it, they're printing more, and it's like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I don't want my money to change. Like, I want my money to be the same money that I had 2 years ago. I want it to be the same money next year. I don't want like a 2.0 version of my money. I want my money to be sound money that I can store value in. And so I think that a lot of these cryptocurrencies are very, very centralized. They pretend to be decentralized because they're on a blockchain. But at the end of the day, they are controlled by a small group of people that can have massive changes to them. And even if they were totally decentralized, they don't have the powerful network effect that Bitcoin has. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be other coins. There obviously are and will continue to be. But I just think that long-term Bitcoin will be the gold standard, for lack of a better term. So, and we can talk about it. I want to open it up to questions, so everybody tell me why I'm wrong here at the end. So accelerating climate change, I already talked about that one. What if Bitcoin gets hacked? We talked about that. It's be very difficult to do, if not impossible. People never use it for transactions. That's another good one. It can't scale. They're starting to in places. And I mean, any new currency, like, it's going to take time for adoption. And so we're seeing things like the Lightning Network, which is a second layer solution. It sits on top of the blockchain. It effectively batches transactions. So you can do microtransactions. So you can send fractions of a penny. So I've got a buddy who has a podcast, and he has people streaming him what are called sats, which are the smallest divisible unit of Bitcoin. So there's 100 million sats, like Satoshi's the guy that founded, like cents. It's kind of a play on the word cents, but he can get these streamed to him in real time. So this is something we could never do with dollars. I mean, Visa is going to charge you. It's the reason why you have to do a monthly subscription fee. But with Bitcoin, because it's just so costly to do these charges, but with Bitcoin, you could literally stream it in real time in tiny, tiny fractions of a penny. And so, maybe there's a future world where you don't pay for cable or for listening to music. You pay as you listen, and you pay just fractions of a penny to listen to your favorite song. And then all over, you go the whole month and you've actually paid less than your Spotify subscription because this technology has allowed you to create less friction with money. So I think the transactions will come as adoption picks up. Bitcoin isn't backed by anything. That's a fun one. We'll talk about what money actually is here on the next slide. It's a Ponzi scheme. People have to keep buying more of it, and it can't go up forever. And so the interesting thing about Bitcoin is that the price or the supply is totally fixed. So there's 21 million, and it is going to continue to go exponentially down in supply. Right now, about 90% of all Bitcoin that will ever be created has been created. The last 10%, the majority of that will be within this decade. And then the last 1% will be over the next 120 some odd years. So it is an incredibly scarce asset that is getting much scarcer all the time. And demand, again, is growing at 2 times the speed of the internet. So, I don't know what will happen to the price of Bitcoin. Certainly in the short term, it can drop very fast and go up very fast. But, basic supply demand models like we use for oil or for gold or for any other commodity will show you that if demand is increasing and supply is decreasing, price does one thing. It goes up over time. So again, we can argue about it, but that's been the track record. It's been on average, it's gone up about 200% compounded annually per year since inception in terms of the price. And I think we're going to continue to see quite a bit of appreciation. So 2 more slides and then I'll open it up. So what is money? Money has characteristics that we can measure. It's not just, the government prints this thing and says it has value. Money actually has characteristics. And so you can look at this list on the right. It kind of compares gold, fiat money like the US dollar, and Bitcoin. It has to be fungible. You can interchangeable, has to be non-consumable. So for example, if I'm trading you a piece of bread, well, that's going to go bad pretty quickly. And people used to trade food back in the day in the barter system. Portability, you have to be able to move it from place to place. Durability, excuse me, has to be able to be durable. Divisible, Bitcoin's highly divisible. It can be divided into 100 million units. Secure, Bitcoin is, right now impossible to be hacked as long as you have your private keys. There's no computer on the planet. It would take, you'd have to run this highest power supercomputer, for millions of years or something. I don't know the exact stat, but it's be very hard to break it. Maybe quantum computers we could move to a more higher level of encryption if that happened. Scarcity, easily transactable, decentralized, and smart and programmable. So these are just some of the things. People have traded things like seashells, livestock. Gold, for example, is a very good proxy to Bitcoin. People say, well, what is Bitcoin backed by? Well, it's like, well, what is gold backed by? Gold is a perfect example of a completely non-government backed, totally just organic thing that became money. The reason why it became money is because it had these characteristics. It's because people need something to exchange and to store value. And so over time, humans tried a lot of different things and they settled on gold. And the reason why they settled on it was not because some grand government conspiracy that everybody's going to use gold. They settled on it because it checked a lot of boxes. It checked all the boxes here on the right. And so, if you look at the traits that money has, there is still an element of it, which is what most people have the biggest struggle with. And that is that money is a belief system. At the end of the day, it can have all those traits, but if you don't believe in Bitcoin and you think it's a scam, you're not going to buy Bitcoin. You're not going to store your value in it. You're going to store it in dollars or gold or collectible cars or whatever you think that you like to spend your money on. So I think that from the belief system standpoint, that's the one thing that I've really seen that is been impressive with the Bitcoin community is that the people that understand the technology and that have been involved with it since it early on are very, very passionate about it. They very much believe that it is a store of value. And there is virtually, and I know a lot of these people really well in the community, and there is virtually nothing that you could say or tell them that they do not believe that this is the currency that's going to power the future. And so if you look at the belief system for the people that have studied the technology, you look at the characteristics of Bitcoin, there are a lot of people that will argue it's the best money that's ever been invented. Again, tell me why I'm wrong here at the end, but that's the reason why they say that is because of these things, right? And then the moral case for Bitcoin, and I've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to go. So I truly think that Bitcoin can make the world a better place. Some people that don't know anything about it say that they're like, you're crazy. It's just fake money on the internet. But I do think that having a sound monetary system and be able to store your value should be a basic human right. According to the World Bank, there are 2 billion adults that don't even have access to a checking account, don't even have any basic banking whatsoever, don't have any way to store money, any way to store value. That is a huge chunk of the population. It's also estimates show that 80% of people on Earth, which I actually would argue it might be 100% of people, either live in a country where it is state-owned or like totalitarian type banking system where you don't really own that property, or you live in a place where there's double or triple digit inflation. The reason why I'd say it may be 100% is because, I mean, look at the US right now. I mean, they're saying it's 6.5%. I think, I bought my truck 2 years ago and it was around $40,000, and that same truck, same exact specs, is $75,000 right now. So you can tell me that inflation has been 6%, but I've seen my purchasing power, whether it be a house, whether it be a car, whether it be the food I buy at the grocery store, I've seen that just completely be decimated over the last 18 months. 35% of every dollar that's ever existed has been printed in the last year and a half. They're talking about printing even more. It could be close to 40% of every dollar ever in existence has been printed just recently. And it's not just this administration, it was the one before that. It's fiat. They can print as much of it as they want. And so inflation hurts poor people the most. I think that when you think about money, and I'll use like my parents as an example, they worked for 30 plus years to retire, and they were very conservative with their money, like tried really hard to pay down their home, to put money away so they could retire. And if the government prints 35% of the money with the push of a button and their purchasing power, again, you can argue whether it really is 30%. I've seen certain things in my life that have gone that much inflated in the last year. But if with the push of a button, you can, devalue the currency by 30%, that's effectively like stealing a third of their entire career. They lost 10 years of their life in the last year of the money that they've saved. Now, luckily, they have assets like stocks and real estate and things, but not everybody has that, right? So what inflation does and what money printing does is it makes the poorest people and the people without assets, or the conservative people that don't want to put their money in stocks, it punishes them and it makes the wealthy wealthier. And you can see from the 1970s when we got off the gold standard to today, the wealth gap has exploded. And the people with assets, the more money they've printed, they've gotten richer and richer. The 1% has gotten so far ahead of everybody else, and wages just haven't kept up. And so that, all coupled with the fact that Bitcoin's censorship proof. And so this is the last point, is that, we're living in a time where, free speech is, I would argue, kind of under attack. I mean, whether it be in social media or mainstream media, some people may argue with me again there. I think that there's a lot of instances where we've seen personal liberties kind of attacked. And so just having a technology where you can say this is objective, nobody can mess with it, it's set in code, and it is objective truth. Like the blockchain has been validated, it's been proved through the proof of work, and there's nothing anybody that can do to change it. Again, there's just nothing like that. So I think that can do a lot of good in the world. I think it can open up banking and access banking to a lot of people that don't have it. If you look at the highest areas of adoptions, it's in places like Nigeria. It's one of the highest adoption areas of Bitcoin. Their government was corrupt. It was corrupt the banking system, and they've moved now to using Bitcoin as their medium of exchange. So these are all the reasons why, again, I think it has the potential to be very disruptive. If you'd have asked me in 1997 to predict Netflix or Uber or, social media, nobody in this room could have predicted it. Maybe someone could have had an idea. And so that's how I think about Bitcoin. Like, I can't tell you all the things it's going to change, but I think it's going to change pretty much everything, because money is the basis of everything we do. So our company, Ancova Digital, we are turnkey Bitcoin solutions. We're doing Bitcoin mining. We have our own mines. We help our customers mine. We do a wide variety of things. This isn't an ad for us, but just wanted to tell you about us. If anybody wants to know more, you can hit me up afterwards. And that's kind of all I got. So open it up for questions. I got about 12 minutes. If anybody's got one, go ahead. Yeah, so the question was, for people that couldn't hear, is that how does Bitcoin kind of act like a battery? And I don't know if battery is a perfect example, but effectively they are taking energy that would otherwise be wasted and then turning that into a monetary value. So they're not going to use that energy later. But for example, you can use the value of that energy, capture that value, which then allows you to have a more robust, for example, base load. So like the power plant example, it's like if you needed to build a power plant, you need lots of base load to have things like renewables. So this big push towards renewable energy, you have to actually increase the base load a lot, because the more energy, renewable energy you have, it's more intermittent, which causes there to be these fluctuations in the grid. And so Bitcoin could act as that stabilizer to where that's that buyer of last resort and first resort. So whenever the wind's not blowing or whatever, you can use that energy to push towards the grid. Whenever the wind is blowing and the sun's shining, you can sop up that energy in the Bitcoin mining and store that value, and it turns it into a monetary value. And then that power plant provider can take that and use it for different.
Awesome. Welcome everyone to Testing in Production with Continuous Delivery and Feature Flags. My name is Cassie Souza. I'm a commercial sales engineer and probably the lowest level speaker you will see today. But no, all jokes aside, I do work for Harness, which we'll learn a little bit more about today. And previously, before Harness, I worked at a small defense contractor called Lockheed Martin. So, first things first, what are feature flags? I want to make this a little interactive, so I want to get a feel for the room. Do any of you guys know what feature flags are? Have you heard of them today? We have one. Okay. Oh, awesome. Awesome. I'll also want to get a feel of what kind of space are you guys in? Are you guys in the software development? Are you guys in IT, security, software? Okay. Software? Awesome. Operational. Oh, sweet. Relevant. Let's go. Okay, this is good. So I just want to set the stage. So of course we want to talk about feature flags. Basically, the idea of feature flags is as you're developing your code that is going to exist in your application, every feature is put behind a feature flag. And we'll go into kind of what that will look like. Basically, you're importing, in a Harness perspective, you're importing our SDK, wrapping your specific feature around, or wrapping your feature around your feature flag. And what that allows you to do is toggle your feature within different environments. And more specifically today, we're going to talk about how to toggle that feature within your production environment, which sounds a little bit scary, but well, it's not too scary once you think about it. And for me specifically, I hadn't heard about feature flags until I had started at Harness, but it's been around for about 10 years and it's ramped up in popularity over the past 5 or 6 years. So there's a slew of providers out on the market. I would say the top would be, of course, a Harness or a LaunchDarkly out there, or like a Split.io, if you guys have heard of any of those three. So traditionally, the way that people have developed software today is, say we have a team of 6 developers. Each of my developers are focused on creating or writing a new feature, which obviously is not quite real world because that would be a huge task for one only or a sole developer there. But let's paint that picture. So 1 dev per feature. The way that this would look like is as I'm developing my features, say I complete my feature, I test it, it runs through QA. But in order for my feature to be a part of a release, I am tied to the rest of my developers. That's how we've seen it traditionally, right? So there's a big release that we're pushing out every month or every quarter, and I am dependent off of the features that I have defined in those releases, right? Have you guys heard of that development lifecycle today? Does that sound familiar to you? Okay. Yep. I've heard it in a sense. Yes. And it might not seem like a bad approach, but which it could be. I mean, depending on what your area of work is, how quickly you are executing these feature releases. But there are dependencies, right? You're dependent on the other features that you're pushing out, and you're dependent on the rest of your team if we're just talking about a team scale. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And this is kind of the all or nothing approach that we talk about when we refer to feature flagging. Let's see. So some of the consequences here we see are your feature release is determined by your developers instead of your business. So basically what that is looking like today, or in the traditional way of developing your software, is yes, you can define a feature release all you want. You can set a date to it, but it is truly not able to be released until your dev finishes it or until your devs finish that release, right? And with feature flags, well, I guess we'll talk into it, but with feature flags, your business can actually control your feature releases instead of having your developers control the feature release. Next up is a slower development of new features, mostly tagging into the dependency on the additional features as well. So as a part of the release that we talked about, if there are 7 features that I want to push into this release, if I finish one, I'm dependent on those 6 until my feature actually exists in production. There's also you not being able to test multiple solution implementations. So if I wanted to test feature A with feature B, but not with feature C, I'm essentially not able to do that because of the concept of the all or nothing, right? It's all of those features or none of those features. This is, of course, depending on how you structure your release management. And then, let's see. Also, there is no way to verify your release, or no way to, or it is very cumbersome to release your individual features into production because of that all or nothing approach. And then finally, we talk about rollbacks. So with this rollback idea, say if one of my features does fail, say I push all my 7 features into production finally a quarter later or a month later, and it breaks my application, or one of the features totally throws exceptions left and right. What will I have to do in that sort of software development lifecycle? I would have to roll back my entire application to the previous good version, right? So that is a lot of work that I do have to roll back. And I want to be able to prevent that, right? Well, me personally. I don't know about you guys. So the new way of software development with feature flags in your continuous delivery process. Basically, each of these 4 developers are again tied to a feature, and they're able to develop that feature, test it, and push it to production when it is ready. You might think, oh gosh, why? Caveat here is that in order to achieve something like this, you can set your flag default value to false. So it's automatic, or by default, when you're pushing it into production, it is disabled. It is not enabled. So even though the code lives in my production branch or my production environment, it is not being executed or viewed by any of my users. And that's how we're able to achieve this sort of additional velocity, as well as minimize the blast radius, as we call it, for those new features that you are pushing out. Any questions here or concerns? Of course, yes.
And I'm sorry, I'll find out a little late. What if features are connected or dependent, or is that accounted for?
Yes, that's a great question. So that would happen all in your code logic, right? So if there are dependencies, hopefully the code would be architected as so, but also within feature flags, there are prerequisites that you can kind of define there. So for example, in order for a specific feature to be enabled, I need this feature to be enabled first. That's kind of how you would maybe go around that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but technically it wouldn't be turned on in production because it is dependent. So, but you wouldn't have to roll it back. That's what I'm getting at. You wouldn't have to roll back, or you wouldn't have to put it back into development. If you can stay there until maybe dependent is fixed or.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yes.
So the feature flag is going to be the pipeline. Like now we are doing CSV pipeline, it's ready for everything. So if the feature flag is going to be in the pipeline, or is it in the code level?
Yes. So for those on the web, The question was if feature flags would exist at the pipeline level within your CI/CD process. And within Harness, yes, we allow that. And we also have feature flag pipelines. So that is separate from your CI/CD process. But what the feature flag pipeline could allow you to do is roll out percentages of your feature to your user base in a percentage rollout manner. So you can automate that process. Or as a part of your CI/CD process, of course, you can have your build, your deployment, and then enable within Harness, it would be a feature flag additional stage that you can roll out a feature from there. You're welcome. Alrighty. So, well, we talked a little bit to this picture already. Well, the previous picture, but basically each feature is pushed out into production. It is disabled or disabled by default. And then when you turn it on, what we're showing here is that you can actually target a feature to a specific user or user group. You probably wouldn't want to do it one-to-one for a feature, but what this will allow you to do is, say I'm rolling out an advertisement to my whole user base, and this advertisement is only relevant to the UK. I could define a user group, target group based off of geography, and I'm only rolling out that feature to a specific geography group. That's kind of how a relevant example that we have seen today with our customers. Or you could roll out your feature to, for example, your beta users. Only beta users first, get feedback, and then you roll out the feature to the wider user group there. Okay, so we talked about feature flags, what they are, how to use them. And now I want to talk a little bit to the use cases here. So increased velocity. I touched on this briefly, but the idea with being able to increase your developer velocity does come from the fact that you don't have those dependencies, of course, from the other features that are being developed at the same time, as well as giving your developers a little bit of freedom and less stress. I will say, being a previous developer, pushing out a new feature is very, very stressful, right? There's a slew of integration that needs to happen. It has to be perfect. That's kind of the expectation that I put in my head is this feature. If I'm putting so much time into it, it needs to be perfect. So it is a lot of pressure there. But with your devs being able to break apart the features that they're creating into smaller pieces, and with the fact that when it is getting pushed into production, it's not actually being enabled, it does take off a bit of stress from your devs, enabling your teams to also develop faster because of the dependency lift. Any questions on increasing velocity or concerns?
So how do you clear out this feature? Like if you are introducing a feature flag, you need to be cleared out, right? And once that validation is done in production, so that is going to be extra effort, from the feature owner. So is that going to be just removing the feature flag from the pipeline, or is that going to be an extra effort?
You mean, okay, sorry. Question. Yes, for the virtual folks, the question. How do you remove the feature flag after it is implemented and turned on? Are you referencing where it exists in the code and maybe potential technical debt, or is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that would be like if you are introducing the code, that means you have to prepare from the code.
Mm-hmm.
If it is from the pipeline, so is that an easy process to remove the feature flag from the pipeline?
Oh, yes. So with our feature flags, with the feature flag pipelines within Harness, so you can enable or disable the flag itself if that's something you would want to do. So there are different options you can execute. So we have two types of flags, Boolean and multivariate. So Boolean is, of course, an on and off. enable dark mode, disable dark mode, or multivariate, where, for example, you could issue out different types of trial periods, 7-day trial, 14, 21 days. So you can choose any of those values that exist as a part of your flag when you execute your pipeline. So you can enable it, disable it. As a part of our demo environment, we actually have a pipeline that enables it. You have a manual intervention, and then we actually roll it back to reset the demo environment.
I'm just asking because we are releasing, for features like for business, and we are holding off, until the business is fine with the validations. Just thinking of those scenarios.
Of course. No, I love it. Next up would be being able to control the releases. That's the idea of being able to focus specific features to different target groups. So if you wanted to control the blast radius for this new feature that I'm pushing out, let me push it out to my beta users first. Let me get feedback from them. If there are any changes that need to be made, I'll make those, and then I will roll out that feature to the rest of my user base. There is also this item or idea of operational control. Basically, what we're referring to here is the kill switch option. So with the feature flag, what you can do is, if it is enabled and it does cause an issue in your environment, you can immediately go in, disable it, and it'll disable the feature within seconds. So if, I guess, for example, if your developers are working and they push out a new feature to production, everything is good and gravy, and then they go to sleep, right? But you are a global company. Australia wakes up, sees an issue. What your Australia team can do, because of the beautiful, easy to read, lovely, colorful, I'm just kidding, interface that Harness has, even your product management team, your marketing team, your sales team can go in and actually disable the feature. So feature flags are not only targeted for your engineers, but also for your customer facing roles as well. And then customer access, that's actually, I guess, I was sliding into the customer access point as well. So that's the idea of your salespeople being able to toggle on and off features. Or not only salespeople. I'm a salesperson now, but I was a DevOps engineer. Any questions on the use cases? Yes?
I have a question regarding, what's your view or feeling as far as traditional testing, like an actual cycle for actual traditional testing? And because I see all the control releases, you can say release to a certain group, i.e. the testers, and they can do their testing. So kind of two-part questions. What's your feel about traditional cycle testing? And also on the control releases, when it's been released, and let's just say the 1-2 people say, hey, there's some change of issue, is that feature completely rolled back, or do they just push additional code which will combine for that particular feature?
Okay, so first question was if testing is still relevant when it comes to feature flags, and 1000%. And within Harness, we actually drink our own champagne. So we do still install feature flags within our whole code base, within our whole platform, and we do still have QA and testing environments. The benefit of testing in production is sometimes most of the times, there is behavior, load, extra data that is not able to be replicated in those QA and testing environments. So I would highly, highly recommend to still continue on with your test environment process. Yes, okay. And then second question was... Okay.
I'm sorry. Thank you for that.
Of course.
So the second question is, if there is issues found in that feature, one feature of 5 that's rolled out, is that particular feature completely rolled back, or can they just push code and it's merged, or how is that managed?
So you can roll back or toggle off the feature through the UI. After you do that, you can, your team can create a hot fix that bug or bug fix, whatever it may be, push that new feature out, then you can go ahead and toggle it back on. You're welcome. All right, feature flags offer a better way. I'm gonna click through all of these. Okay, so some benefits of feature flags, of course, include the flexibility to let the business determine the release date of those features, release new features faster and iterate. We've talked about all these topics already, so I'm just going to step through them. You're able to test multiple solution implementations simultaneously, as well as release individual features to production daily, whereas internal to Harness, we are actually pushing to production, releasing new features, features to production. What am I saying? We're actually releasing about 100 features to production daily. Does that mean all of them are available to all of our customers? No, but it is that mindset shift, right? And you never have to roll back a good new feature due to a different bad feature. So I think that's pretty powerful. As well as positive outcomes, there's those happier developers, faster innovation, happier end users, as well as better alignment with your business. And then this is a cute little meme. So there's that, you guys know that Dos Equis man, the most interesting man in the world, that said he doesn't always have to drink beer, but when he does, he prefers Dos Equis. That's what this meme came off of. So basically, it's back in 2006 or whenever feature flags started, not 2006, probably 2010, 2012 or so. Basically, there were shirts walking around saying, I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. This was a joke, more so because that was a scary concept back then, right? Honestly, it's so kind of scary when you don't know about feature flags. But hopefully, after this presentation, this quote here will take a little bit of edge off of it for you. Next, we're going to talk about why testing in production is less risky. So it enables your QA and dev team to gain real-world insights and allowing them to learn at scale. What we mean by that is since you're able to wrap your feature flag and push it into production, your pure QA team is able to see that feature in your production environment, for example. It'll also allow you to answer questions like, what does your real load do to your latest changes? What do users do that's different than expected? Are you seeing performance change you hope to see? Are users reacting the way that you intended them to? How does your change react under various stress situations? And also, what should feature flags not enable? It should not enable your devs being cavalier about what you release and them being so bold, feeling so bold that they release this wonderful new feature into production and, eventually, or maybe potentially putting your application or platform at risk. It's not what we want to push for. It's also to make sure things work. So that's what the QA testing is for, right? So QA testing is still necessary. It's really about seeing how your feature reacts in a real world production environment. Further benefits here are being able to highlight unexpected problems, instantly switching off features without disruption, or being able to redeploy your application, which is actually, I think, very, very important, not being able to redeploy your application. Depending on what your software development lifecycle process looks like and your deployment process looks like, your deployment could already be a taxing process, right? It could be a stressful time. for your team. So I would love to prevent having to do that and redeploy my application, right? So feature flags will allow you to steer away from that, as well as being able to target specific end users or cohorts. Next up, I'm going to talk about when to use feature flags versus canary deployments. Is anyone here familiar with canary deployments? Okay, I see some head nods. So for those who are not, a canary deployment, basically as you're rolling, what a canary deployment allows you to do is as you're rolling out a new version of your application, you are switching traffic to you're rolling out a new version of your application and you're switching a certain percentage or fraction of your traffic to that new version, allowing you to connect into various APM or logging tools like a Datadog, a New Relic, and App Dynamics, track those metrics. If any anomalies occur when it comes to response rate, CPU usage, anything like that, then you can it allows you to roll back faster and catch those issues instead of pushing out a brand new version of your application and then seeing that later on. To some people, they would say, who are familiar with the canaries and also familiar with feature flags, we often get asked, okay, what's the difference here? What's the difference between a canary deployment and a feature flag? Because they're essentially doing the same thing, which I would say, then they are not doing the same thing. Reason being is because a canary deployment is focused on your application itself, making sure your application deploys successfully. There are no issues right off the bat with your infrastructure changes, if there are any, or any other of the standard metrics or logs that are tracked as a part of your deployment process. For the feature flags part of it, basically we focused on the canary deployments, how that is my artifact, that's my application in itself. For us focusing on the feature flags part of it, we actually do both. We roll out canary deployments and we also enforce feature flagging. Feature flagging are specific to the features that exist within your application. So the canary deployment is the big picture. Feature flags are little pieces of that picture, right? And being able to toggle those. So that's the difference there. Are there any questions or concerns with the description? Are you guys still confused on why you would use one or why you would use them both? Okay, no questions. Let's see. Okay, lastly, so how feature flags help speed up your software development. Of course, it allows you to decouple the deploy from your release. What we're considering deployment here is basically the deployment of your app, whereas a release is releasing the feature to your customer. Also, it allows you to take those smaller steps, which will eventually lead you to a higher velocity. We have our feature flags subject matter expert that likes to, he uses this story. And so I'm actually going to steal his story for this specific bullet point. Sorry, Andy. So he was saying that when he was climbing Mount Rainier in Seattle, I believe, last year, and it is quite a high mountain and quite steep. So as you're progressing up and mountaineering, they actually recommend that you take little steps as you're going up instead of, going straight up the mountain and taking huge steps as you would if you're on a flat plane. Basically, the parallel we're trying to make here with this is that with feature flags, you are taking those little steps and you are able to get to the top of the mountain at a faster rate than you would be if you were running straight up the mountain. And of course, with feature flags, you're only able to roll back the features that don't work instead of all of the features that were a part of your release. Your team or your company is able to ship only when you're ready, as well as eliminating that all or nothing approach that I think I've said 10 times now. And of course, there's that faster feedback loop from your end users to your engineering team, right? Any questions on feature flags here? That was actually the last of it for me. I was going to open up for Q&A, and yeah, we have some. Yeah, of course.
Quick question. So how do feature flags work with upgrading existing features? Like I have a whole set of code that has to, like this feature has already been implemented.
Mhm.
I need to add functionality to that feature.
Yes. So what you would need to do is actually integrate our feature flagging with that feature that you're talking about. So we actually recommend that if you do adopt feature flags, to adopt it with new features that you are developing, because unless your team doesn't mind taking that lift upon, then it would be a smoother transition to integrate it with newer features that you are pushing out.
So once that newer feature is pushed out, so we have the whole feature, I mean, going 6 months, a year down the road, and we have the business come to us and say, we also need this thing to do this. Well, now we already have a feature flag on one thing, but I need to push changes to that. Would that be considered a completely different feature? How would I have to engineer that so that if those changes went in and broke something, I could turn off just the new changes, or I have to turn off the whole feature? Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. So if it's something like that, I would probably break down the feature into more micro parts.
So it goes back to dependencies. It's just that the dependencies are.
Right.
You can break those apart.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. Well, we ended it. Yeah.
Do you have any customer success stories you can share about ROI?
Yes, not off the top of my head, but
Well, you said you were sales, I figured you would know.
yes, I am a sales engineer now, but I am newer to the harness crew. But yes, I know there are definitely success stories out there. And we actually have on our harness website, there are the customer stories that we have. So if you were curious and you did want to navigate there, we have a list of our customer success stories there. If there are no more questions, that was all I had. You guys have 9 minutes back in your day. Thank you.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we are back at Techstrong TV at InnoTech Dallas. What a great presentation we just saw from the folks over at Harness. We actually ended a little bit early, so thanks for bearing with us here. But we had a great event today. We are closing things down now. I hope everybody enjoyed the sessions, and we are going to be back at the next InnoTech, which is happening later this year. I believe the next one is in Houston, but I could be wrong. It could be Oklahoma City. I'm not entirely sure. But thank you very much for joining us today here on Techstrong TV live stream at InnoTech Dallas. We'll be back tomorrow with a brand new Techstrong TV broadcast, regular broadcast. It's going to be hosted by Alan because I'll be on the plane going home. But I'll be back on Techstrong TV Monday with a brand new show for you. So until then, I hope everybody enjoyed today's events, and I hope you enjoy the weekend. And whatever you do, please stay safe.